Of course, this video would not be complete without a truly righteous salamying, so let's salami the heck out of the Oathbreaker Knight. We're going to do no prep work, we need no buffs at all, and all we have to do is just chuck our salami. And as you can see, we're starting a fight, winning initiative, and we get to continuously salami this guy. He's blinded and radiated already, and in actual combat against a hostile creature rather than just an NPC would also be receiving stacks of reverberation. I'm not entirely sure why they don't show up against the Oathbreaker Knight, but he should be getting reverberated until prone as well. Then we're going to continue to throw our salami, because we can, of course, become... there we go. Now the reverberation is showing up. We can, of course, use Action Surge to salami many more times per turn, and we can do it again. If we happen to need even more salamis, then we still have a bonus action, so let's go ahead and just drink a speed potion, and then we can chuck yet another salami. There we go. Enemy is prone and on the ground. On Honor mode, that would be our last attack. On Tactician mode, we can continue to salami again, and of course you can add in even more actions with Terrazul or Bloodlust potions, etc. But after a turn of actions, the enemy Oathbreaker Knight has been blinded, radiated, and knocked prone, completely ineffective for the rest of the encounter. That's what salamis can do for you. Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are covering one of the funniest, but also stupidest builds that I've ever done for Baldur's Gate 3. We're going to be maximizing and using to its absolute fullest potential the most powerful, mightiest, most awesome weapon in the entire game. I'm talking, of course, about the Salami. This build is going to smash enemies with our salami so hard that they go blind, because as everyone knows, if you touch the salami too often, that is what happens. We also get to use a subclass feature that's almost never used in Baldur's Gate 3, and use Tavern Brawler in a way that's not broken. We get to use a Tavern Brawler build that doesn't break the game, but instead does the thing it's supposed to do, enable hilarious circumstances and the funniest possible outcomes. This build is a blast to play, and surprisingly effective, even on high difficulty settings, as you will see as we go through it. Alright, let's get to the build. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Josh Hobbs for the $10 donation, and to Bitta and Maeve and Game Life Coaching for becoming channel members, as well as to Ken RQ, Paul Bailey, and Brandon Meyer, who've now been channel members for 6 months. Thank you so much, my friends. I really do appreciate the support, and thank you for sticking around. I'm using Lae'zel as the example character here because the idea of her arriving on Faerun and then through a series of hilarious misunderstandings becoming convinced that the salami is the ideal weapon to use against these strange alien creatures that she suddenly finds herself surrounded by is very funny to me. I just really like that image, so that's what we're going with. But of course, if you're building this as a custom character, the race that you pick doesn't matter mechanically, so you should go with a gnome because that's the funniest option, and big things come in small packages. We're going to start with levels in Barbarian, because we want to get the blind online as soon as we possibly can. That's what makes this build actually pretty effective in combat. Blind is a pretty powerful debuff, and we're going to be passing out multiple blinds per turn that last for multiple turns for free, with no resource expenditure at all, which can actually shut down entire encounters all on its own. So this is more of a debuffing build than a damage build, but it's actually very good at debuffing once we get that effect online. So we want to get there as soon as possible. That comes from the level 6 Barbarian class feature of the Wildheart Barbarian Chimpanzee aspect, so we need to get there as quickly as we can. For our ability scores, we're going to be taking 17 Strength, because of course this is a Tavern Brawler build. We want to be hitting our thrown weapon attacks, so we want our strength as high as possible, and 16 Dexterity, because for some reason, I'm not entirely sure why they did this, the save DC on the Chimpanzee aspect blind is based on your Dexterity, not on your strength, so we need our Dexterity as high as possible to make enemies actually fail that saving throw relatively reliably. Then we'll take 14 Constitution, to make sure that we have a decent number of hit points, even though we had to take high dexterity and strength, and 10 wisdom for our saving throws. For our skill proficiencies, you obviously want athletics because you want to be able to push enemies around after you have successfully salamied them. And then you want to have perception because, you can't hit something with a salami if you can't see it. So perception has got to be as high as possible. Animal handling or survival or nature, those are really up to you. You won't use them for this build, so just take whatever you think fits best flavor-wise. That's it for level 1. Let's move on to level 2. At character level 2, we're taking our second level of Barbarian, and we get an ability that's actually more important than you might think for this build, Reckless Attack. Now, we can't recklessly throw our salami, as odd as it sounds that you can't do that, because that seems like something you should be able to do to me. You cannot use Reckless Attack alongside a thrown weapon attack, but the advantage on attack rolls applies to every attack you make that round if you use Reckless Attack. So if we Reckless Attack in melee with our first weapon attack for the round, then any subsequent attacks that we make from extra attack, from action surge, from haste, will have advantage on those rolls, which can be used against an enemy that's otherwise hard to hit by recklessly swinging at one of their allies, and then salamying them as much as possible with advantage to absolutely guarantee that you land as many salami hits on them as you can, and thus get off the very important blind. So Reckless Attack is pretty important to keep in mind for when you have a hard-to-hit enemy with high AC that you just really need to land some salami hits on. You can Reckless Attack on one of their allies to make sure that you land the attack. Between that and the double hit bonus that you're getting from Tavern Brawler, you're going to be able to hit even the highest armor class enemies extremely reliably. At character level 3, we are of course selecting our Barbarian subclass, and we're going to take Wildheart Barbarian. Now obviously this isn't the normal pick for throwing weapon builds. You normally will build with Berserker for thrown item builds, but Wildheart is going to give us the blind effect that is what this build is based around, so of course we have to take it. What bestial heart you take is actually really up to you. All of these have really interesting options for our character. If you want to build this as more of a support character, Wolfheart Barbarian is actually quite good for this character, because you can blind enemies with your thrown salamis and give your allies advantage against you can blind ranged enemies and then give allies advantage against melee enemies with Wolfheart Barbarian. You can use Eagleheart to jump down on top of an enemy's head and then salami the heck out of them, which is extremely funny. So, funny is the goal here, so that one I highly recommend. Or Elkheart, which lets you stampede and also use one of the Barbarian aspects that is very rarely used. So if you want to use this build to explore aspects of Barbarian that you probably haven't picked realistically because they're uncommonly used in character optimization, then Elkheart is the pick for you. Of course, Bearheart to take half damage is always excellent, and Tigerheart works pretty well because you can swing your salami in a wide arc and cause bleeding to a whole group of enemies, which is, of course, extremely funny, as well as adding a whole bunch of damage from the actual bleed damage itself, and allowing you to apply other effects that care about bleed from items and buffs that you might find throughout the game, as well as make it easier for your allies to land Constitution targeting effects against those enemies, because they'll have disadvantage on con saves when they're bleeding. Now, unfortunately, the blind is a dex save for enemies, not a con save, so Tigerheart doesn't help with landing the blind, but it's still a pretty powerful effect. Here, I'm going to recommend Elkheart just because it's so rarely used, and the Primal Stampede is very funny. Also, the additional movement speed is very powerful, so the ability to reposition yourself to where you need to be to maximally salami your foes is going to help out a lot. So both of these are pretty nice. The ability to knock enemies prone with your Primal Stampede gives you a whole additional set of debuff actions that you have access to in addition to the blinds. So now you can pass out two of the most powerful debuffs in the game, depending on what's more important in that fight. That's it for level 3. Let's move on to level 4. And at level 4, we get access to our first feat, and that feat, of course, is going to be Tavern Brawler. Now, the great thing about Tavern Brawler here is that, unlike in a lot of Tavern Brawler builds, this isn't broken. We're not using a weapon with the thrown weapon property, so while we're doubling our chance to hit, we're only adding our strength modifier to damage once. So we hit very reliably with our Salami, but it's not doing a ton of damage. It's a very light object, and it doesn't have the thrown weapon property, so it counts as the lightest possible improvised weapon and does 1 bludgeoning damage, plus our strength modifier from Tavern Brawler. So the chip damage is present, but not particularly important. But Tavern Brawler does let us hit these attacks extremely reliably, which means that we can force enemies to make guaranteed saving throws against the blind effect over and over and over again without spending any resources and extremely reliably throughout the entire game. The save DC on the blind won't be incredibly high because it's based on our dexterity, but when they're rolling it many times per turn, they're going to fail it, and Tavern Brawler allows us to make sure that they're rolling it constantly. At character level 5, we get access to fast movement, which of course helps us to position, and extra attack. As you might imagine, the only thing better than 1 salamying a turn is 2 salamis a turn, so extra attack, giving us the double salami action, is going to make our character twice as effective at landing these blinds. Once we get those next level, we're going to be outputting a tremendous amount of debuffing because we have extra attack, so we can make so many attacks per round. Then, finally, at character level 6, this is where things really come online for this character. We get our animal aspect, and we get to take Chimpanzee animal aspect. We gain resistance to falling damage, which is, of course, not terribly useful. You probably shouldn't be taking that much falling damage in the game, but I suppose if you are taking falling damage, this can be helpful. But throwing camp supplies blinds enemies. Now, it's not mentioned here how the save DC works for this, but the save DC, enemies do get a saving throw against this whenever they are hit with a camp supply. And that save is a dexterity save against a save DC based on our dexterity. So it's going to use our proficiency and our dexterity to calculate the save DC. Aspect of the Beast Chimpanzee is pretty powerful because it blinds for 2 full turns, and blind is a pretty powerful debuff, and it doesn't cost you any resources other than your attack. You don't have to spend a rage charge, it works even when you're not raging, you don't have to spend anything else, but it does get very expensive in camp supplies because you constantly have to hurl your food and drink at enemies. That's where the Salami comes in. Because Salami is both a camp supply and a weapon, this gives us the option to have infinite camp supplies for our Chimpanzee aspect, so that we can constantly throw this Salami over and over again, get it back, and continue to pass out the blinds, which we're going to do by taking as our next level, instead of Barbarian, Fighter. Fighter is going to have a pretty powerful effect for us as we level up, of course, but firstly, what it gives us is access to a fighting style, and there are 2 options that are really good here. Unfortunately, dueling doesn't work for us, even though there are normally ways to trigger it for throwing weapon builds. It won't work for this build because we're throwing an improvised weapon, so we can't get the dueling bonus, even though we would be wielding a salami in one hand. But we can get defense to just increase our armor class, which is of course always good, or protection. This character will be able to stand next to allies a lot. Since you're a throwing weapon build, your positioning is pretty easy. You can just go anywhere that you can hit an enemy with a salami from. So if we use a shield, in addition to our Salami, we can help keep our allies alive, both by blinding enemies and imposing disadvantage on any attacks from enemies who aren't blinded. Protection fighting style can be pretty helpful for that. So I'm going to recommend Protection. I think that this is a powerful option for your party, but of course if you aren't using this in a group where protection fighting, where you will be able to stay near your allies, maybe you have a lot of characters that are going to be always in melee, or a lot of characters that are going to be stealthed way away from the fight or something like that, then defense is a great option as well. At fighter level 2, we get Action Surge, which means in the opening round of combat, we can now Salami 4 times, which is enough to land a blind on pretty much every enemy. They will definitely fail a saving throw in 4 attempts, even if they have pretty decent dexterity saves. Most enemies will fail a blind save against that, so Action Surge can help to blind even the most resilient enemies around. There's surprisingly few enemies also that are immune to blind in the game, so this will be able to be applied to most of the most dangerous fights in the game pretty easily. But the real reason, of course, that we're in Fighter is going to be Fighter level 3, where we get access to the Eldritch Knight subclass, which can allow us to bond with our Salami as a weapon, as a magical pact weapon, so that when we throw it, it comes back. No longer are we throwing away camp supplies whenever we hurl them at enemies. We can consistently throw and recover our Salami every round of combat, meaning that we are able to do this many, many times per turn without having to carry a big bag of throwing weapons and everything like that. We also get to take 2 cantrips, and to ensure that our Salami lands reliably, we're of course going to take True Strike, and then for our second cantrip, we're just going to take Blade Ward, because this can be helpful if you end up in a bad situation, and this character is pretty tanky, so damage, has quite decent HP, so damage resistance can keep you alive if you're surrounded by groups of enemies. For our spell selection, we're going to take Shield, great reaction to have available for every character, and Magic Missile just to finish off low health enemies if that comes up. Then for our expanded spell selection, you can take a utility spell like Long Strider or Enhanced Leap, something along those lines if your party doesn't have access to them. Or if they do already have access to them, then I think that the funniest possible option here is to take Grease, just because you can place it under enemies and then blind them in it, then they won't be able to jump out of it and they'll have to walk around in the grease and potentially fall over. The saving throw on the grease here is going to be based on our intelligence, so it will be very low, but again, if you're making enemies roll a lot of saves, then even if they have relatively low save DCs, you give them a lot of chances to roll a natural 1 and still fail it. Character level 10, we're going to take our 4th level of Fighter to pick up an ability improvement here, so we're just going to grab our Strength to go to 20 Strength to maximize both damage and accuracy with our Salami. And then for our spell, we're going to pick up Chromatic Orb. This again can be used for ice surfaces or just various surfaces to keep enemies blinded and stuck inside of. If there's any spell here that your party is missing, of course you can replace one of these spells with one of the utility spells available here. Long Strider and Enhanced Leap are both excellent to have. Expeditious Retreat can help you get out of bad situations, and Disguise Self can let you pretend to be someone else so that the guards can't catch whoever's been throwing salamis around. Then we're going back into Barbarian, where we get to pick up Feral Instinct to give us +3 initiative, so that we can Salami as quickly as possible, and cannot be surprised. Obviously, Feral Instinct is an incredibly powerful class feature, and means that we can get away without taking Alert on this character, and still blind enemies before they go, basically all of the time, especially because at level 12, I'm going to recommend taking an 8th level of Barbarian, and then taking a pretty unusual feat for me. I wouldn't usually recommend taking ability improvement 3 times, but increasing our initiative, armor class, and the save DC on our blinds is pretty helpful, so you can just increase your dexterity even further. There's also, of course, a bunch of other very funny or powerful options, but my favorite of them is actually Mage Slayer, if you're not taking dexterity, because ending your turn next to a spellcaster after blinding all their allies, and then when they try to cast a spell, you bonk them on the head with a salami, is just incredibly funny to me. So that's what I would recommend for if you aren't increasing your dexterity. Maybe you're using the Gloves of Dexterity to get 18 dex, which is definitely a powerful option for this build as well. Alternatively, if you are struggling to survive, the Tough feat is actually pretty good for this character. Also, you just get plus 24 HP, which combined with your damage resistances and so on can keep you alive, and that is a totally reasonable pick for this build since we have 14 Constitution. So if you are having trouble just dying, then the Tough feat could help out as well, but probably you won't be because enemies will be blinded all the time, so they won't be able to hit you. All right, my friends, that is the Salami Slinger, build 1 to 12, but of course we can improve it even further with items. We already know the most important one, but there's some others that can help out as well, so let's talk about those. For items for this character, there's a few different things that we are looking for. So first off, we're going to want one of the medium armors that has uncapped dexterity modifier, like the Armor of Agility, because we have high dexterity, so we can increase our armor class to pretty reasonable values. Combined with the ability to wear a shield, it doesn't actually matter what shield you wear. You don't need any of the high value shield, the normally in-demand shields, like the Sentinel shield or the or Ketheric's shield for this build, so you can just use pretty much any shield at all. You will have quite solid armor class for a character that also has quite high hit points, so you'll be pretty hard to kill. You can use the Gloves of Dexterity to still have 18 Dexterity, alongside the ability to increase your Constitution and Wisdom further to give yourself better saving throws, and you should be looking for items that increase your saving throws, because with 10 Wisdom, one of the only dangers for this character is being hit by a debilitating wisdom targeting save effect, so the Cloak of Protection or other things that increase your saving throws can help out a lot with that. Of course, we're going to want the Ring of Flinging, because we're a throwing weapon build, so increasing our thrown damage by 1d4 is going to add a lot of damage. On Tactician mode or below, this also applies your Tavern Brawler bonus twice because it's buggy, so you can more than double your damage by adding the Ring of Flinging. Thanks to the damage rider bugs in the game. On Honor mode, it's still just an extra d4 damage, which helps when you're chipping down enemies over longer combats, which this build, of course, is going to fight. You can also build yourself into a even more powerful debuffing force by including the Callous Glow Ring. This causes your attacks to deal 2 radiant damage, and then alongside that, you can use the Luminous Gloves to pass out Radiating Orb. When you've got an enemy blinded and affected by Radiating Orb, they're never going to hit attacks. And of course, when you're using that combo, you might as well add in the Boots of Stormy Clamor. Since you're inflicting conditions constantly, you can apply Reverberation and knock all enemies prone. Enemies who are prone, blinded, radiating constantly are just completely useless, so this character can just completely bludgeon enemies into submission by repeatedly salamying them in the face. Finally, of course, I mean, this is still an Eldritch Knight Barbarian Tavern Brawler build, so if you do need more damage for a hard fight, you can, of course, Pact Bind any of the normally powerful throwing weapons like Nerolna. You don't even have to Pact Bind Nerolna, but you can add in just an actual throwing weapon into your build if you're a coward. Alright, my friends, I hope that you have enjoyed this salamying build. It is extremely funny, and I highly recommend playing it. It's actually surprisingly good. It takes a few levels to come online, obviously, since you don't get the core combo until level 9, but in the late game, this build is extremely funny, and very few enemies actually can deal with the constant output of blinds, so it's shockingly effective in combat. So go ahead and give it a shot and let me know how it goes for you. All right, my friends, hope you've enjoyed the video. And of course, as always, if you have, leave a comment, like the video, helps me out with the channel. So I do appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course, you can subscribe for more Baldur's Gate 3 builds and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.